Jin, Jenny, Genie, however you want to pronounce it. Creatures born of several of the four basic material planes neighboring planets. Earth, fire, water, wind, the classics. Ifrits, the Johnny, the Myadrigs, and the weird Earth ones that aren't defaultly really well known, so who cares really what they're called? But for today's subject of choice, let's go and start with the easiest and probably the most commonly associated one you can get. The Djinn, or Genie, however you want to go for it. They are probably what you think more or less for genies themselves, as they are the ones that are commonly associated with being the most friendly. They're fairly large creatures, being 1,000 pounds, being 10 feet, 1,000 pounds, monstrosities that rampant their way around wherever they decide to go for on a regular basis, mostly spending their time floating in the clouds. They are very adept at actually using combat weapons. They prefer using scimitars over actually bashing stuff with their fists themselves. As with many outsiders, well, in this particular case, they are effectively immortal. They are very commonly associated as being the first humans of the elemental planes, as their history claims they were here as first creations in it. Ignoring the actual elementals of the planes themselves, that's probably the most accurate way to describe them. They are the humans of most of the elemental planes. These the Djinn themselves, inherently being wind-based, are actively fly-based. Air mastery, whirlwinding themselves, I mean, just the air mastery alone isn't super amazing. However, in return, they do possess some fairly good and useful offensive stats. Perfect fly speed, as with most magical flights. Their hits are pretty decent considering, well, kind of good, but it's good enough. Large-sized creatures, so they take up the 10-foot space, have the 10-foot reach. An oddly uncommon feature a lot of races seem to have. They can turn into a whirlwind for 10 minutes, 1 minute, whatever. And they usually use it to escape. As with trying to catch the wind is harder than it needs to be. Oddly enough, it doesn't seem like that should be their first choice, but they can cast invisibility on themselves, plane shift if need be. And, of course, their once per days are pretty much common magic to help with household necessities, creating wine, gaseous form for more escapism, because why not at this point? Major creation, used mostly for food once again. It can be used for other things, but vegetable matter is permanent, so they project images. For some reason, have windwalk. I don't really know what the windwalk does for them, but it's there. They don't typically speak to you directly. They mostly use telepathy and projections to beam it up into your brain so that you know who you're being talked to. And in some cases, you may even run into some of the elderly and more powerful ones, the noble Jinn, or the Viziars, which do grow with strength, as with all Johnny and Jenny and Ifrits that you want to run into. The older they get, the more powerful they get, the more hit dice they gain. Naturally, being nobles grants them the capability most craved by people, the ability to cast wishes to non-genies, which is kind of ironic to the amount of Ifrits and other Jinny kind that show up in a lot of it. So unfortunately for those particular parts of it, the Jinny can, get to enjoy the wishes. However, everyone else will. And even without that capabilities, they are very, very on the side of dangerous for their CR. A CR5 that can fly like no other. Otherwise, they are essentially what you think of when you think pretty much for the Aladdin. They live in deserts when they do arrive for the most part. If you manage to capture them, preferably on a good side of it, they do grant those wishes to you. And inevitably, they are particularly uncommon to be worried over. They don't get used a lot. It's mostly for genie lamps, and Absalon and unschooling probably deals a lot with them, but for the most part, they show very little otherwise for it. Seemingly because they are genies, they have effective immortality, far beating them down with a stick and putting them in the dirt. But even then, that only slightly slows them down, seeing as it returns them to the elementals and then reincarnate. Unfortunately, not always guaranteed back into air elementals, particularly if they do evil actions. They can end up stuck as an undead, stuck into the hells, even end up as a diva if they're really lucky. But even then, they're not gonna be the most friendly about their very obvious racism. As with every genie kind, they are friendly on the outside, and a lot of them are unintentionally racist. They will insult you to your face as you are a non-genie, and some are a little more direct than others. The Gen probably would do it offhand. As with some of the others, it's a little more rough. As their wishing capabilities do exist, it is not perfect, nor is it probably the best. It'll be flashy, fancy, but once you make that wish, they'll probably give you something you didn't necessarily want. So, you can always try. And if you do get them to be nice enough to do it, lucky you, because very few people manage to do that. Otherwise, if you manage to make it this far, what would your 3 wishes end up being? Maybe you'll wish for new socks.